Hello, Adam Mandelblum here, Technical Marketing Manager with ThinkAgile here at Lenovo, and I am here to talk to you about Azure Virtual Desktops on ThinkAgile MX. So, let's first talk a little bit about what is ThinkAgile MX. Well, ThinkAgile MX is our hyperconverged solution for Azure Local. This allows you to bring that same experience you have with Azure and run your workloads in Azure on-prem on ThinkAgile MX. So the way this works is Azure Arc will kind of act as that connector between your Azure instance and your ThinkAgile MX on-prem. And then things like Microsoft's Entra ID running in Azure, as well as AD Sync to keep all those users synced up will be in place to make sure everything is in sync here. And then at that point, you will be able to spin up your workloads either in Azure or on-prem in Azure Local, depending on what makes the most sense for you, be those virtual machines, containers, databases, etc. So, now that we've covered that, let's talk a little bit about why you'd want to use Azure Virtual Desktop. So, first of all, you can run it on virtually any device. So, what this means is whether you've got a laptop of any make or model, a tablet, even a phone, you're going to be able to access that virtual desktop. There is a Windows app that can be run on many of these devices, or it can even be run in a browser via HTML5. It's also very simple and scalable. So this is all built into the Azure control plane in Azure Portal, and it is extremely easy to bring up new virtual desktops and then deploy them out to your users. Everything is built on Azure. Obviously, if you're leveraging Microsoft desktops, being built on Azure makes this very simple. Whether or not you want to run Windows 10 or Windows 11 desktops, and these can be multi-user or individual single-user VMs. Now, why are people using virtual desktops? So, number one is security, all right? Obviously, if you are controlling this image, either in the cloud or on-prem, it's going to be more secure than somebody's laptop or desktop, which you may have less control over. It's also a lot easier to spin out these security requirements, install new applications and everything in your images in Azure versus everyone's individual laptop. Also an elastic workforce. So many people are constantly traveling. People are all over the world. People work from home, etc. And they may be moving back and forth from the two. So with a virtual desktop, you're able to give them access to their applications no matter where they are. You also may have some power users. So this might be people who need things like GPUs, etc. Those can be more cost effectively shared out to these users through the use of virtual desktops. And finally, unique applications. So these might be legacy apps or something that may not run well on someone's local machine. You can leverage these Azure Virtual Desktops to deliver these as in a desktop or as applications to those users. So now that we know why you'd want to use Azure Virtual Desktop, let's take a look at how this works when we're talking about Azure Local and ThinkAgile MX. So, first of all, a user is going to log in and they're going to hit this Windows control plane, which exists in the cloud. They will go ahead and authenticate using their Microsoft Entra ID. And then the control plane will then send some information back to the user with their connectivity. The user will then launch their session through the secure network gateway. And at that point, it will be determined whether or not their desktop lives in Azure or whether it lives in Azure Local. And they will make that connection and run their desktop. Now, why might we run some in Azure and why might we run some in Azure Local? There's a multitude of reasons. But you may want to run these in Azure Local for maybe cost effectiveness, right? So Azure Local is going to be more cost effective than the cloud. It also may be less latent, right? So the closer you are to your data and applications, the better your applications are going to run. So if your users are near your data center, they're going to get a better experience connecting to local apps and desktops. Also regulatory concerns, right? So depending on where you are in the world, there may be specific requirements around where that data can reside. And if it's a problem for it to exist in Azure, it's going to make more sense to have that data in your local environment. And then last but not least, data gravity. So this is very much kind of like the lower latency discussion, right? If your applications are close to the data, most likely they're going to perform better. However, that being said, the great thing about this solution is it is a hybrid multi-cloud solution. So there are going to be instances where Azure may make more sense for your desktops. This could be maybe users who are in a geographic location that you do not have an Azure local data center, or perhaps certain applications that, or desktops that you need to spin up unexpectedly, right? For example, when we had a pandemic a few years ago, many people went to work from home. Perhaps you don't have the capacity locally. Now you have the flexibility to spin these up in Azure and meet that need immediately without changing the user experience. So, one thing that is important to note is no matter where you run these desktops, your user experience is always going to be the same, and your administrative experience is going to be the same. It's just going to be a matter of where these desktops are being run. So let's take a deeper look at that. I'm going to show you a quick demo of how easy it is to deploy a desktop to a user of AVD in Azure or Azure Local.
Okay, let's take a look at how easy it is to deploy Azure Virtual Desktops. We simply log into Azure Portal and choose to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop. At this point, we will now go ahead and select the resource group that we want these to be a part of and give the host pool a name. We now want to choose the preferred app group type. So this can either be a remote application, which means we're only giving access to remote apps, or a full desktop experience, which we will choose. We also have the ability to choose between personal or pooled desktops, personal desktops being 1 VM per user, and a pooled desktop being a pool of desktops available to however many users want to use them, until which time, of course, that pool runs out. We'll now get to choose between different load balancing algorithms. We'll go ahead and pick the default, and we'll set a max session limit. Now we're being asked if we want to add these virtual machines. We're going to go ahead and choose yes to make this really easy for us. We go ahead and give our hosts a name, and then choose between either an Azure virtual machine, which will be running in Azure in the cloud, or an Azure Stack HCI virtual machine, or now Azure Local, which will be running in our Azure Local instance on MX. We now choose where this cluster will be located, and the image that we want to use. We're going to go ahead and create some Windows 11 desktops here. We're going to go with standard security. We're going to create 2 new virtual machines, give them 2 processors each, 8 gigs of memory. We're going to put them on the MX Premier network. And finally, we need to go ahead and give it a user account to allow it to join to Active Directory, as well as a local user or administrative user for the local machine. We're going to go ahead and choose the defaults here, and we're going to create this group of desktops. You'll see they're being deployed. Let's go take a look. They have been deployed. We've got 2 total machines, of which 2 are currently available for connection. So let's go ahead and connect to one of those virtual desktops. So what's going to happen now is this is going to talk to the Windows Virtual Desktop service running in the cloud, authenticate the user. It will then be told which desktop it is able to connect to, and then it will then create that connection through the secure access broker into either the cloud or on-prem. In this case, we are running this on MX in Azure Local. And that's all there is to it.
All right. Well, thank you for watching. And if you would like more information on running your Azure virtual desktops in ThinkAgile MX or just ThinkAgile MX in general, please go to lenovo.com.